Hello, Glee. I'm Joshua Davis. I'm your great-great-grandfather. I'd like to tell you about my life. I was born the 23rd of December 1820, at Alton, Illinois. I was the fifth child of 9 that were born to Joanna Thomas and Dennis Davis. At the end of my life, I had what was most important to me. I had 18 children by my 3 wives, 11 sons and 7 daughters. I was blessed with a loving, ambitious, public-spirited family in a posterity. I was the grandfather of 40 children at the time of my death. I will leave it to my wife Susan to tell the details of my children. I grew to manhood on my father's farm at Alton, where there were Negro slaves to help us with the work. The vision of Joseph Smith and the restoration of the gospel on the earth was received the year I was born. This would play an important role in my life. I became interested in the gospel as taught by Joseph Smith. As a young man I was baptized into the Latter-day Saint Church on April 16, 1840 at the age of 19 by Orson Hyde. I was the only one of my family to join the church. The rest of them remained with the Methodist and Presbyterian faiths. About this time, my family moved from Alton, Illinois to Black Oak, Missouri. I was in Kirkland, Ohio where I met Susan and Cole. We were later married in the Nauvoo, Illinois temple. The saints were gathered in Nauvoo and were building a beautiful city. I worked on the Nauvoo temple. Many men donated 1 day in 10 as tithing labor. I became very well acquainted with the prophet Joseph. On seeing me on my way to work in a pair of worn-out shoes, Joseph later presented me with a new pair of boots. While in Nauvoo I became accepted as a Freemason in the Nauvoo Masonic Lodge. I was raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason's 3rd degree on January 3 of 1845. Freemasonry insists that every member profess belief in a supreme being, that no women be admitted, and that the discussion of religion and politics be banned. Our first child, William Dennis, was born at Carthage, Illinois, in 1842. Carthage is 20 miles from Nauvoo. Just 2 years later in 1844 the prophet and his brother Hiram were murdered at the Carthage jail. Susan Ann and I were outside the jail a short time before they were murdered. I had served as a bodyguard of the prophet. That was a sad day for the saints. We suffered persecution along with the other saints. Our second son, Henry Lewis, was born in 1845 at Nauvoo. In 1845 my family left Nauvoo, where we had lost most of our possessions, as we started the westward journey. On September 3, 1847, our third son, Joshua Martin, was born at Stringtown, Iowa. 2 years later a fourth son, Heber C., was born October 23, 1849 at Council Bluffs, Iowa. He died 3 months later on February 5, 1850, while we were in Council Bluffs. Although we started westward in 1845 my finances prevented me from reaching the Salt Lake Valley until 5 years later in September of 1850. I was urged to go into the barbering business and make my home in Salt Lake City. We decided instead to go to Provo where there was an abundance of fish and game and water for irrigating crops. When we got to Provo, people were living in a fort for protection from the Ute Indians. I built a log cabin inside the fort where our first daughter Emily Ann was born on December 23, 1850. In the spring of 1851, I began acquiring land and preparing the soil for cultivation. My first land was near the Geneva Resort where I built a log cabin. I always took a gun with me into the fields on account of the Indians. The city of Provo was planned out and the blocks were numbered. The lots were placed in a hat to be drawn. I drew the northeast corner lot on 1st South and 4th West. Here I built a 2-room adobe house into which I moved my family from the cabin in the fort. Polygamy was being practiced by members of the church at that time. I married my second wife, Elizabeth Jane Brandon. To this marriage was born a daughter, Rosetta Mary B. Elizabeth left me and went north, a few months after our marriage. After moving into the adobe house, I met Johanna Anderson from Ephraim, Sanpete County. She was a young Swedish girl about 16. She came to Provo to help Susan with the housework. Later I married Hannah on December 12, 1856. I built her a log cabin across the street east. Later she lived in the cabin on the farm at Geneva. I bought a second piece of ground south toward Springville. Hannah also lived on this piece of land, in a small home. President Brigham Young called me on a mission to the Central States in 1870. I was 50 years old. While on this mission, I visited my family. When calling at my father's home I found him chopping wood. It had been 22 years since I had seen my father and he did not recognize me. Wishing to have some fun, I did not disclose my identity. I asked him for food and lodging, but he told me he couldn't on account of his declining years. He sent me to my brother John's home nearby. John's wife met me at the door and recognized my smile and mannerisms. She exclaimed, "It's Uncle Josh." After supper, we went to our father's home and spent the evening with he and our stepmother, Nancy Potts. My brother, John, was later converted to the Latter-day Saint faith. On my second mission east, I visited Mr. John Whitmer at Far West. He was formerly a member of the church and one of the 8 witnesses whose names are attached to the Book of Mormon. I stayed with Mr. Whitmer one night and part of 2 days. During the visit, we spent most of our time conversing about Mormonism, in the course of which Mr. Whitmer, with uplifted hand declared, "I saw with my own eyes the plates from which the Book of Mormon was translated, and I also saw an angel who witnessed the truth of the Book of Mormon." He told me that his brother David, one of the 3 witnesses to the Book of Mormon, was residing at Richmond, Missouri and was keeping a tavern. He said that Oliver Cowdery, another of the 3 witnesses and Joseph Smith scribe to the Book of Mormon, had died at Richmond, Missouri in 1849. Toby, a black man we nicknamed Dick Davis, lived with us in Provo. He volunteered to come with me across the plains. He was the son of one of my mother's slaves. He remained with my family as my manservant. He lived in a small one-room house on my lot in Provo. He grew up being one of the Davis boys, cooking, hunting, and logging. He was like one of the family. I taught my boys to be cooperative, peaceful, brave, and industrious, which led to resources for their family's income. I was active in Provo's development. I was appointed Utah County's first sheriff. My boys and I helped build roads, canals, the Provo Tabernacle, and ward houses. We cleared land and hauled building materials and fence posts. I acquired homes, land, horses, livestock, farm implements, wagons, and buggies. Through my constant diligence, industry, and instruction, I tried to make my family's lives a bit better each day. I was considered among the well-to-do persons in Utah County. My friends called me the Rich Josh Davis. I always referred to my family as God's people. I tried to do my part in making the desert bloom into green pastures and flowering orchards. I died of asthma on November 21, 1902 at the age of 82. I'm buried in the Provo Pioneer Cemetery. Thank you for listening to my story.